your experience working on the COVID-19 ward in Florida. Good morning, and thank you so much for accepting the invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Awesome. So, thank you again for accepting the invitation, and I really look forward to a very good discussion with you. So, as I mentioned earlier to the listeners, you are here as a medical doctor working on the COVID-19 ward in Florida. And what we want to hear from you today, Dr. Maloney, is some of the experiences you have had. And of course, I will be posing some questions as it relates to COVID 19 and its treatment, symptoms, and of course, COVID 19 vaccination. As you know, here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we are in our third wave, I believe, third wave of the COVID 19. And at the same time, we have a very high vaccination rate. And so, even though the vaccination rate is high, there are still some people that are vaccine hesitant. Some people are still, pondering and wondering if they should go and get vaccinated. I'm hoping that at the end of this conversation, that someone listening would make that step and say, "Boy, let me go and get vaccinated after listening to you, Dr. Maloney." So I want to begin on the topic of its treatment and symptoms, COVID-19 treatment and symptoms. And the first straightforward question is, what are the common signs and symptoms of COVID-19 that your patients have been reporting?
Well, thank you very much. I'm a hospitalist, and so I work on the COVID-19 ward, as you say, and I take care of patients who are in the hospital with a plethora of problems. Um, but within the last year, I've worked mostly on the COVID-19 ward. And so the patients who are admitted to the hospital after they present to the emergency department are what we locally call accident and emergency at home. Once they are seen by the emergency physician, then their care is assumed by me and my colleagues, and we take care of them, and hopefully our efforts are successful and we get some patients home, and unfortunately we lose some patients. But to go back to your question, the patients who are presenting to the hospital, to the emergency department, run the full gamut of symptoms, right? We have patients who are just presenting with generalized weakness, fatigue. You have patients who have high fevers for no specific reason. Obviously, they weren't tested before. You have patients who presented with diarrhea. There's some patients who present with respiratory symptoms, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, a severe cough. All these symptoms are generalized symptoms that tend to trigger the hospitalist or the physician in the hospital that this patient may have COVID 19. I would say that obviously there are some patients who present with very, very mild symptoms. And so our suspicion at the time sometimes is not that great. But as the clinical course plays out, a fever or something that's misplaced in the symptomatology seems to trigger the mind of us who are seeing the patients. And so patients don't have any specific problem. They don't present with one thing, right? And so that's why in the hospital, our suspicion has to always be high. We always have to be on the lookout when the presenting symptoms and the story simple don't add up, or this chest X-ray looks abnormal, that triggers us to test the patient for COVID-19.
Hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Maloney. As you explained that, where you see people respond differently to COVID-19, and of course, on the COVID ward, you would say that you have different people from different backgrounds, different ages, different race, and so you would know definitely that people respond differently to the virus. With that being said, it leads to my next question. Now, you may have some people that uh, present with general weakness. You're just fatigued, you're just tired, and others may have a serious respiratory problem. What are the organs that are most affected by the virus?
Well, I've seen all organs. affected by the virus. Predominantly, obviously, the biggest concern is the respiratory system. A lot of patients present with breathing problems, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing. And so that seems to be the number one presenting complaint. And so because of that, and the number one complication of infection, in order for a patient to be hospitalized, they must require some sort of supplemental oxygen, which means your oxygen level on room air in and of itself is too low for you to be going home or for you to stay in the community. So you have to come back, stay in the hospital for us to give you oxygen. And obviously, depending on your course, you get certain treatments. So the lungs primarily is the number one organ, I would say. However, I've recently had a patient who was extubated and came out of the medically induced coma. When I examined him, I realized that his face was a little bit asymmetric. It wasn't nice and symmetric that I expected. And he was a young man in his 40s. And because I'm aware that some patients with COVID-19 can have a stroke, in fact, he had 2 strokes while he was in the medically induced coma. And that was causing the right eye to droop and the left side of his face to have a little bit a droop as well. And so we've seen the brain being affected, we've seen the liver being affected. But one of the harsh realities and the biggest side effects that I've seen, and unfortunate, is renal failure. Now, when it's a renal failure, I mean kidney failure, where young people are coming into the hospital with relatively well-working kidneys and leaving the hospital on dialysis. And this is all secondary to this massive inflammatory response that is triggered by the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the symptoms of COVID-19. So we've seen the liver being affected. We've seen the brain with strokes being affected. We've seen the lungs, not just with infection, but there are a lot of patients who can come into the hospital, develop blood clots, not from the vaccine, but from the virus itself, because the virus tends to allow the blood to clot a little bit more easily than the average person who does not have the infection. And so we've seen blood clots in the lungs. We've seen pulmonary fibrosis. We've seen viral pneumonia, which is infection of the lung tissues, and we've seen renal failure. We've also seen, at one point in time, there was something called COVID toes, where some people have this ischemic or this lack of oxygen and a low blood supply to the toes, and sometimes they get ischemic. Sometimes some patients get rashes because of COVID. So we've seen every single organ system in the body being affected from the virus.
Wow, thank you so much for providing that, Dr. Maloney. You know, from that, you can tell that COVID-19 is not just a flu. You know, I've had conversations with many people, and they are of the position, they hold the argument that COVID-19 is just a flu and it's just a cold, you get it and you get over with it, you go back to work, you go back to normal. Now, I'm not saying that it's a death sentence. I'm just saying that, you know, based on what I've seen and heard from organizations such as WHO, PAHO, and from yourself, Dr. Maloney, I think it is safe to say that COVID-19 is not just a flu, and it's so much more, and people should really take the necessary precautions to protect themselves. Now, can you explain in detail the process or steps taken to treat a COVID-19 patient?
Sure. Let's talk about firstly the mild symptoms. And I would have full disclosure. I was diagnosed with COVID-19 in June of 2020. And this was last year, obviously, before there was any vaccinations that was on the market yet. In fact, me and my wife developed COVID-19. My wife is also a medical doctor, and she contracted the virus from a patient that she was seeing in clinic. And obviously, she came home, and our suspicion was very low at the time because all she had was fatigue. She was simply tired. And as you know, there's some of us who spend a lot of time on our feet, and at the end of the day, simply feeling tired is quite usual. It's not unusual, right? And so I had COVID-19 in June of 2020, and my symptoms were very mild, and my wife's symptoms, luckily as well, were very mild. And so the predominant treatment for mild to moderate symptoms, those patients who simply have a fever, they may have chills, they may have muscle pain or myalgia, they may have joint pain or arthralgia. It's really supportive care. There's no magic pill that we can give you when you have mild to moderate symptoms to get you feeling better. It's simply allowing the body to run its course because the body has built-in mechanisms to fight any infection. In fact, a fever is your body's way of raising its core temperature to try and burn off whatever is infecting it, whatever is foreign to it. And so for mild to moderate symptoms, this supportive care, we have patients stay home. Obviously, that is the exact same thing that me and my wife did. We stayed home for 14 days, we quarantined. And we took Tylenol whenever we had a fever, or whenever the pain or the muscle pain or the joint pain was a little bit too much. And we stock up on our vitamins, et cetera, et cetera. Interestingly, though, I lost the sense of smell and taste for approximately 7 days. So for 1 week, I was not able to taste anything. If I drank coffee, water, juice, milk, they all tasted the same. And food had no particular taste whatsoever. So for patients with mild to moderate symptoms, like I said, it's supportive care. We try to keep you away from individuals so that you not spread the virus. And we give you, we encourage you to take multivitamins to continue to build the immune system, and Tylenol as well. Because early on, coming out of the experience from Spain and Italy, etc., we were a little bit cautious in giving ibuprofen, what we call NSAIDs, for patients with COVID-19. So that's for mild to moderate symptoms. When we're talking about moderate to severe symptoms, that is where I come in, right? Because obviously it's the moderate to severe symptoms that bring you to the hospital in the first place. The difficulty breathing, the being unable to go from your bedroom to your bathroom without having to catch yourself, without having to stop midway in the hallway and the passageway to catch your breath, or sometimes not having any energy to get off the bed to go to the bathroom, kind of thing. And so some patients just seem to go on themselves, unfortunately. And so when you come to the hospital, and again, I want to put this in context. I am living in Tallahassee, Florida, working at a hospital here in Tallahassee. And so I don't want people to expect that the same treatment here is the same treatment that is being administered at GNF. But once you come to the hospital and you're deemed a COVID-19 patient, we have 3 particular wards that we put patients on. It's the COVID-19 observation ward, the PCU or the pre-ICU or the ICU step down, and then the ICU. And so based on your oxygen requirement, you are placed on these wards. But generally, the treatment is basically the same, just that the oxygen demand, the amount of oxygen that the patients require is much greater in each different ward. And so once you come to the hospital, there's a medication. And once you meet criteria, not everybody meets criteria. There's a medication called remdesivir that was approved by the FDA for the treatment of moderate to severe COVID. It's a very expensive medication. When I speak to my pharmacy colleagues, I believe it's $3,000 US for 1 bag.
Wow.
And people have to get 5 bags of that. So that's 15,000 US dollars for one treatment for one particular patient. And so we give that. Obviously, we give dexamethasone, which is a steroid. We can give it via IV or by pill. And that the purpose of the steroid is basically to quell the inflammation and the inflammatory response. Because as we enter into a conversation later on, and hopefully people call and ask some questions, you realize that it is the overwhelming infection and the body's response, right? This overwhelming inflammatory response that the body triggers that pushes patients into the danger zone and cause them to end up being intubated or unfortunately passing away. And so that is the treatment that we do for patients. Once you get the remdesivir, we give you dexamethasone, and we also give you a blood thinner. And that is an important point because I mentioned before that we've seen patients come to hospital with blood clots in their legs, blood clots in their lungs. And we've seen patients with strokes. And when you do the full stroke workup, you see that there is no plaques anywhere in the brain. And so this was likely what we call a thrombus. This was likely a clot that broke off somewhere caused by COVID that went up to the brain and caused a stroke. And so patients, when they come into the hospital, after we do the full assessment to make sure that the patient can tolerate blood thinners, every single patient in all the COVID wards, whether you're in the ICU, whether you're in the pre-ICU or the ICU step down, or the COVID-19 observation ward, every single patient is given blood thinner because we want to prevent the formation of clots, because we see that very, very common in patients with COVID-19. So if I want to recap, for fever, we give you Tylenol. Here in the US, we give you remdesivir if you meet the criteria. Again, it's an extremely expensive medication. In fact, sometimes the hospitals will tell you if the patient doesn't meet criteria, if the patient doesn't want it, please don't give it. Because once you've given something and the patient says, I don't want that, you just waste $3,000. And obviously that adds up. Dexamethasone, which is a steroid that patients get, and every single patient is getting a blood thinner. And oxygen, obviously.
Dr. Maloney, thank you so much for that. Let's take this short break quickly to acknowledge the sponsors for this program, and when we come back, we're going to continue on the subtopic of treatment for COVID-19. We'll take this short break, and we will be right back.
We're different. We're 98.9. 98.9. Win FM.
Pour it up, meet the thirst quencher in my cup. If you have one, hold it up and say, pass the brother colors in my life. Refreshing and nice, and I drink that what we like. Must stand full of vibes, living for the color. I know black and white, we do what we like. We live to enjoy life. Pour it up, different flavor. Load it up. If you have one, hold it up and say, pass the brother colors in my life.
Triple the joy at home as you elevate your experience with Flo's new Triple Play bundles. For the first time ever, bundle up and save on internet, TV, and home phone together for more satisfaction. For as low as $175, enjoy up to 35 megabits per second super fast internet, 70 TV channels with HD entertainment, and free landline minutes with the all-in bundle. Visit your nearest Flo store to sign up for a Triple Play bundle. Conditions apply.
The South 98.9. Win FM.
Triple the joy at home as you elevate your experience with Flo's new Triple Play bundles. For the first time ever, bundle up and save on internet, TV, and home phone together for more satisfaction. For as low as $175, enjoy up to 35 megabits per second super fast internet, 70 TV channels with HD entertainment, and free landline minutes with the all-in bundle. Visit your nearest Flo store to sign up for a Triple Play bundle. Conditions apply.
When they start them there, we are top man, we take charge. Have no reaching now, we are shell down us. Blast like a star in some Galapagos. Overdo it, we take it too far. Take charge, take charge.
We are hot gal, we set the trend. Magnum we drink for the top man then. Wine with the style, no stop from spin. Hot blend, back bend, and take charge, take charge.
Magnum tonic wine, for the real star them. Take charge, take charge. Must be 18 or older, drink responsibly.
Welcome back to Voices on WINNFM 98.9. I'm your host for today, Devon Cornelius, and we have on the line with us Dr. Dijon Maloney, who is a medical doctor in Florida working on the COVID-19 ward, of course, assisting in this fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. And he is here sharing his experiences on working on the ward and speaking about COVID-19 treatment, symptoms, and of course we're going to get into vaccination. At around 11:45 we're going to take some quick calls to hear from you, the listening audience, if you have any questions. And of course we're coming back for the second hour. As you know, we'll take just a 15-minute break thereabout for the headline news. So we'll take some questions before and we'll take some questions right after for the second hour. Welcome back to Voices, Dr. Maloney. So we left off talking about the steps taken to treat COVID-19 patients and what are the processes taken to treat people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19. As we continue on that, how do you treat a COVID-19 patient that has serious underlying health conditions?
The presenting symptoms of the patient, right? And obviously, if, like I said before, there's a criteria for getting that medication remdesivir that explained, especially expensive medication.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's being administered in the Caribbean. I don't think so. Maybe a few islands, but like I said, it's extremely expensive. And so one of the criteria for getting that medication is the renal function, the kidney function, because it's a renally excreted medication. And so if a patient has poor renal function, then that automatically precludes the patient from not getting the medication, right? And so it's a caveat, because in those patients who have severe illness, you have to, number one, balance their medical issues. You still have to take care of their medical problems, as well as treat COVID-19 and the symptoms of the virus. And like I said, everybody has different symptoms. And so you have to track the patient's course on a daily basis. You do blood work every day. And because these patients tend to change very quickly overnight. I've had patients come into the hospital on Sunday, and by Tuesday night, they were dead. Young people in their 30s. And so you have to watch them very carefully. But going back to your question about serious health problems, we treat the health problems. We can't ignore them, right? But we also have to take care of their presenting symptoms of COVID-19. And so what that means is that as a physician, we have to take a closer look with this particular patient. I can't just give you everything for COVID-19 and ignore everything else. If you have a history of seizures, I have to make sure that you continue your seizure medication. If you have a history of what we call congestive heart failure, I have to make sure that me giving you the remdesivir and fluids, etc., I don't fluid overload you. Because if I'm doing that, then all of the fluid will end up in your lungs. And if you're fighting a lung infection and I'm giving you fluids to fill up your lungs with fluid, then I'm setting you up for failure. You can see there. If you have hypertension, I have to make sure that your blood pressure medications are given or adjusted to make sure that your blood pressure stays within a relatively controlled range. I don't want your blood pressure to be super high, where you can have a stroke, not from COVID, but from having high blood pressure. If you're a diabetic, obviously we know that diabetics have very, very high sugars, and they have a slower process of healing than the average person. And so that medication, dexamethasone, which is a steroid, it causes the blood sugar to be extremely high. So a lot of patients, we have to try and even give them insulin sometimes, even when they're coming to the hospital and they're not insulin dependent, they don't take insulin. Because some of the medications I'm giving you to help your body fight COVID causes your sugars to be a little bit higher, then you will qualify for getting insulin while in hospital, because I don't want your sugars to be astronomically high, because that in and of itself could put you in a diabetic coma. So patients with severe medical problems, they're a little bit more on the tightrope. We have to watch them carefully. We have to take care of them. They require a lot more finesse from the physician, as well as taking care of their medical problems. You have to treat the COVID-19. And so it's a little more of a challenge, patients with severe health problems. And that is why we push for those patients who have severe medical problems. We want you to be protected at best with the non-pharmaceutical and the pharmaceutical measures against COVID-19, because those are the patients that tend to do worse.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Maloney. Let me pause quickly to recognize Dr. Garfield Alexander, who just joined us actually to be part of this conversation. Good morning, Dr. Alexander, and thank you so much for accepting the invitation here at WINNFM to have this conversation.
Thank you so much, and I just love the way you turned the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Maloney, good morning. Is it still morning in your area?
Yes, it is morning. It is morning.
Okay.
Awesome. So as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about COVID-19 and its treatments, symptoms, and of course we're going to get to vaccination. We're going to open up the phone lines at around 11:45 to get some questions from the listeners to hear what they have to ask and what they would like to know about. But just before you came, Dr. Alexander, we were talking about COVID-19 treatment and how you treat people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19 and they have serious underlying health conditions, and generally how you treat COVID-19 patients. What are the steps and the steps taken to treat a COVID-19 patient? We also touched on earlier parts of the body or organs mostly affected by the virus, and of course touching on the most common signs and symptoms of COVID-19. But I want us to continue quickly. Can I get your take on the treatment of COVID-19 patients, particularly those that have serious underlying health conditions?
Well, I'm very different to Dr. Maloney in that he's seen COVID patients in a totally different extreme,
Right.
and at the final end of it, getting to the final now, trying to prevent the final end. Whereas I'm in the district where my role is mainly preventative. So I wouldn't see unless the patient appears in front of me or at my hospital or in my clinic in severe respiratory distress, I most times won't be directly treating a patient in a lot of the ways that Dr. Maloney is. So my focus is more prevention, education,
Right.
and I've seen very little COVID positive patients.
Right.
And even when I've seen COVID positive patients, the majority of them have been asymptomatic or mild symptoms. I had the experience of 2 patients that were in respiratory distress, and because I was seeing them in a more of a cottage hospital setting, which is mines in the country, they were just referred to the ER.
Okay. The next question I had was in relation to